All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Building Charleston podcast, a podcast where we spend some time each week to meet the leaders who are shaping the Low Country as it continues to grow. My name is Matt Chapdelaine. I am the host of Building Charleston. I'm also the broker in charge at Lane Commercial Real Estate. We're recording today on February 7th from the Building Charleston studios and also the home of Lane Commercial Real Estate. As a reminder, you can listen to us on every single podcast source available, Apple iTunes, Spotify, Anchor, but you can also watch us on Instagram and YouTube now. So today's topic, it's no secret that South Carolina and the Charleston region have been growing exceptionally fast, amongst the fastest in the country. And I got to thinking, why is that? Is it just the weather? But I think there's some other aspects to it. There's certainly more to the story, and today we're going to find out a little bit more with one of the individuals who's been very influential on kind of our past and is going to be influential on the future of where Charleston's going. So today's guest is the former governor of South Carolina, a congressman, a presidential candidate. Today's guest is Mark Sanford. Mark, welcome to the Building Charleston podcast.
Pleasure to be with you.
Well, thanks for being here. I typically ask my guests who come on here to tell us a little bit about themselves, but in your case, you're a public figure, very widely publicized. So I'm not going to ask you to get too much into I guess your story, but we're going to talk to lay the groundwork today. We'll talk about two kind of separate stories. One, I want to kind of talk a little bit about your impact on the foundation of what has made Charleston and the South Carolina region so popular. But then I want to learn a little bit more about what you're working on today, because obviously being a presidential candidate and the other things you're working on is very, very topical stuff. So let's dive into kind of the past. If you were the governor during a very influential time in the Charleston area, what was it like being the governor and really laying the groundwork for all the success that the South Carolina region's experienced?
Yeah, I mean, Charleston's growth has been on its own, and so I'd give credit to Joe Riley and people like that have been instrumental in being firm and clear in their vision of what might Charleston look like, 100 years from now or 50 years from now. What we tried to do was to complement those local efforts with an underlying playing field that was conducive to business. I would tell my team and the cabinet, pretend we're a different country, which didn't work out so well for us some time ago. If you look at it, Fort Sumter, not in that sense, but in the sense that if you think about Estonia, or if you think about, India, or if you think about, pick your country out there, mm-hmm. We're in an international competition for jobs, capital, and way of life. And capital is going to gravitate to those places where it's basically loved. Mm-hmm. And so what we tried to do was to get the soil conditions right. So whether it's two kids in a basement with a dream, whether it's a multinational corporation from across the Atlantic or Pacific, whether it's a business somewhere else in the country thinking of relocating, how could we create business conditions that were conducive to them to either growing that business here, starting the business here, or moving the business here? And so, during our time in the governorship, everything from education reform, with first of its kind charter school, or workers' comp reform, or tort reform, or the first income tax cut in South Carolina's history. I mean, we did a lot of things that were all aimed at one simple thing. How do we become more conducive, more inviting for capital?
Okay. And how do those conversations start? So, take like Boeing might be like the higher profile, but I'm sure that underneath Boeing is, a lot of, mid to smaller size companies.
Sure.
How does that conversation start? What does the conversation start look like? And what are the themes that people are telling you, hey, listen, this is what we're really looking for in a place
Well,
where
we actually had Michael Porter, who's a competitiveness guru from up at Harvard, with South Carolina ties, come down and to talk about sort of a competitive analysis. What was our comparative advantage relative to other places? And so I would say what it looked like was couplefold, looking at our strengths. Mm-hmm. I mean, you look at the amount of warehouse, for instance, that we went after. Well, why? Because of our geography, mm-hmm. And where we are midway in the Atlantic, and the fact that we had a deep water port, the fact that you had the I-85 corridor. We looked at, again, a lot of niches, but we did look. I mean, Boeing came here, somebody that everybody needs to pat on the back, who lives right here in Charleston, who does not get the accolades that he deserves. The reason that Boeing is here is because of Bob Faith, who's head of Gray Star. And he was my Secretary of Commerce at the time, and I remember walking in, he'd found an article in Fortune magazine. He opened it, look at what they're doing with composites and commercial aircraft, and what if we went after that? Because right now, Boeing is in Everett, they're not doing commercial aircraft outside of Everett. What if we, looked at alternatives to what they got? And so you began a conversation with Jim McNerney, who was then head of Boeing, and one thing went from there. We went to the Chinese. It was interesting. At that time, there was a bit of protectionist foment, not that there isn't now, and we went to them and said, look, you have a political problem. And everybody's got to save face. That's something actually very important within Chinese culture. But people have to save face in America, too. And so if we lose a factory, if politicians don't have an excuse to say, we lost this, but we gained this one over here, they got to have somebody blame. Guess what? You're it. And so you could invest in Florida, you could invest in Texas, you could invest in a lot of different places out there. But why not go to the place wherein it's sort of the epicenter of protectionist movement? Because at that time, Roger Milken was still alive. And one thing led to another, and as a consequence, Hire came here, first of its kind in terms of manufacturing. I won't bore you with all the stories, but the point is, we look from comparative advantage. We look to problem solve for other places around the country, around the globe.
Wow. Now, tell me a little bit about the port in your estimation, how important it is in Charleston, because I read something in the Post and Courier yesterday that as an independent state, South Carolina does more trade with China than just about any other country as if they were to stand alone. How important is the port to drawing in, again, a Boeing or some of these other manufacturing companies?
It's very important. It's an added feature, and distribution in a global economy is incredibly important. I mean, I believe what Friedman talked about some time ago in this notion of the world is flat. And as a consequence, we're in a competition the likes of which we have never seen in the history of man. I mean, it used to be nothing against somebody born in Burma, but if you were born in Burma, and unless you got a green card out of that place, you may love your wife, you may love your kids, but let's say you had incredible intellectual capacity. There was no way to export the value of your intellectual capacity. Now with globalization, for the first time ever in history, you could get on the internet and actually export the value of your intellectual capacity in ways that have never before been the case. It's really changed the playing field. So the idea of another point of connectedness is the importance of the port.
Okay. One last question on politics, and we're going to move on to some more topical stuff. But what's the difference in terms of laying the groundwork for the growth here between being a governor and being a congressman? Is it drastic? I assume it's drastically different, or how much?
Well, it's not different, but what everybody forgets is the third leg of the stool. The reason that so many people come here is not only because we're inviting for capital relative to some other places, but because of quality of life. And what we better watch out for in the low country of South Carolina is killing off the goose that's laying the golden egg. Because not so much with industry, but when you talk to, in fact, with industry, I remember having, Vought Alenia, which was the precursor to the Boeing investment. They made the original $600 million investment. I remember we'd picked them up in some cow field in Alabama, and we'd flown them in. I said, I want you to drop in over the base and put the plane on the deck as we come around Kiowa and then come up through Charleston Harbor and land. By the time we'd gotten into Kiowa, these guys were already sold. We were trying to create the illusion that every house was like the house at Kiowa.
Sure.
But the point was, it wasn't an illusion. We have a look and a feel that's different than Linden, New Jersey. I mean, nothing against Linden, New Jersey. Yep. But so, one of the things that I didn't get to finish when I was in Congress that I still want to work on as a private citizen is this idea of a mega park at the tip of Daniel Island. We've got to do some things to preserve open space and quality of life, because that's what draws many of the retirees here. That's what keeps many of the young millennials here. And you can lose that very, very easily. And if so, great. They got a bigger port up in New York, and they've got probably better air service coming out of Newark. Keep your point of competitive advantage. And for us, it is quality and way of life.
Okay. Well, it's a great answer to the question, and certainly leads me into the transition, which is the second half of this conversation. Mark, what are you working on these days?
I don't know. I used to be a real estate guy ages ago. Maybe we'll go back to that. But the problem is I can't compete with guys as smart and good looking as you are. So I'm out of luck there. And so I don't know what I'm going to do next. The whole presidential thing was never a true presidential run. It was an attempt to elevate. The buddies that came to me on this thing came after the day after I lost that race in Congress. They came and said, "Look, God just cleared your calendar for a reason." I'm like, "So glad you got the direct connect. Fill me in."
Yeah.
And they said, "No. What you need to do is primary the president." I said, "Are you completely out of your minds? There's no shot." I said, "Of course, there's no shot. There's no way you could win." But after essentially 25 years tied and involved in politics, what's a couple of additional months if you could raise and elevate this simple question of how do we pay for all this stuff, which is not being talked about in this presidential cycle on the Republican nor the Democratic side. And so one of my great worries in terms of what comes next is tied to this notion of sustainability. Our finances are not sustainable as a country. And if we simply wait till we go over the curve financially, every one of us is going to get burned. It'll have implications in terms of the value of the dollar. It'll have implications in terms of future inflation. It'll have implications in terms of the value of what you may have saved to date. And so I don't know what I'm going to do, but always in some capacity, even as a private citizen, I want to have a hand in trying to elevate that debate, because if not, it's going to really burn a whole lot of folks, among them my 4 sons.
Sure. So what are the steps we take? Because I think you look at politics, and not necessarily a political show, but let's call it a finance show. It's business, left, right, center, or any kind of combination in between. You look at the budget, which is important, and it's what we're talking about, and it just keeps no matter what, it balloons. It goes to the moon. What can we do? What should we do?
Every one of us, in short version, every one of us needs to start raising hell. Jefferson talked about the fact that a democracy rests on the active participation of its citizens. And what too often happens, and I get it, everybody's busy with trying to get the kids to and from soccer practice, to and from school, themselves to and from work. We're busy. We're tapped out. But every one of us needs to carve just another couple minutes to doing something about the larger landscape that we're all dependent on and all operate on. That's the political environment. And so it means make noise on what are you talking about? When these folks on the Republican and Democratic side come up with these proposals that do not include financial reality, people need to challenge them on it. I'll give you another example that really bothers me. I don't know if you saw the stuff in the paper this week on the Charleston Airport Authority. Are you kidding me? A 290, and that's the tip of the iceberg. There's another 40% on top of that when you include state benefits. So a 300,000 plus job, and Elliott Sumner's certainly a smart guy. He's operating in his best interest, but that's not what a public board is supposed to do. They're supposed to operate in the public interest. And so you can Joel wind the board so that it's configured to appoint you to this 300,000 plus job without one interview for one other person. And you're telling me out of the thousands and thousands of people I've come across and you've come across, not just in the Low Country, but across the state of South Carolina, across the nation, we're not going to interview one person because we've got somebody here on the board. And so, Henry Fishburne resigned, said, this is crazy. This makes no sense with a public entity. But what they're presupposing is that people are too busy with their lives. Nobody will make noise. Nobody will protest and say, forget it. Why am I paying what I'm paying for the cost of parking at the airport if I'm paying for this kind of cronyism? Every one of us needs to find ways to make a challenge, to make some noise, whether it's on something local like cronyism, raw political cronyism, as has been editorialized by the Post and Courier here in Charleston at the Airport Authority, or on the national debt, or pick your subject.
Yep. Well, and to give some context for those who are listening who are unaware of the situation, Elliot Sumney is the son of the mayor of North Charleston, which is where the airport, the Charleston Airport, CHS, resides, and he was awarded a position as the CEO of the airport authority, and it's $290,000, and it's funny.
Nobody would award it. Yeah. He arranged the votes on the board. Now, here's the problem with it. That board is about to control almost $1 billion of new spending. And if a board will act that much out of the public interest, get ready to get fleeced, because a bunch of money is about to go before the board. And it's the little crumbs you got to watch out in public policy, when people can pull off $1 million here, $1 million there. As I can't remember the former senator from, I guess it was Arkansas, you say, $1 million here, $1 million there, and then later you begin to talk about real money, and these things add up. So I think it's important to thwart and to challenge cronyism right there at the start, rather than let the thing fester.
Yes, because as people who listen to the show know, I moved here from Chicago. Chicago is a place where
you know it. You know cronyism.
This is layup stuff. And in fact, my local friends here have kind of asked me about this, or they said, "Boy, this is crazy," and maybe I'm just numb to it, because in Chicago it's a cottage industry. I mean, this is a rounding error in terms of. This is not the exception; it is the rule.
Right.
And all that stuff was started really big before I got there.
But it's the reason you moved from Chicago, which is the reason we're able to have a lower price point on our government relative to the Northeast or relative to a place like Chicago, is traditionally that has not been our way of life. It's existed. I've seen it. I was governor for 8 years. You saw different bits and pieces of it. But it was in Abbeville, South Carolina, or it was in Allendale, and there wasn't much happening there. But you get into a vibrant market like Charleston, and you let this stuff get started, it's a cancer, and it grows.
Is there anything that we can immediately do, or should immediately do?
Yeah, I'd call your state house member or your state senator, and say, what are you going to do about this? Because it's the local delegation that ultimately makes the appointments that are driven through the governor, signed off by the governor, but it begins here at the local delegation. And so Chip Campson and Peter McCoy and Leon Stavronakis, and you can fill out the list on the local delegation. Okay.
Before we pivot off of, I guess, what you're working on now and kind of things you want to talk about, is there anything else you want to discuss or think that needs to be brought out?
Well, it's a big world out there. There are all kinds of things we could talk about. I would talk about simply. I would say two things. I would say one, what I said earlier, which is we live in a remarkable part of the world, and it's amazing to me the number of folks that I talk to that have come from somewhere else to be here, again, in large part because of the lifestyle. And they sort of make it fit. Okay, doesn't maybe have the financial opportunity that New York or Chicago does, but man, the quality of life is a whole lot better. I talked to somebody yesterday, and they were telling me how their assistant had moved down, who previously had been in one of the outer boroughs of New York. Their family was squeezed into a 2-bedroom flat, no open space. And so this assistant moved down. Now they live like in a 5-bedroom house up north of Mount Pleasant, have a pool in the back. They're just going nuts on how crazy it is, on how much they get relative to what they used to get. But it's important that every one of us look for ways of insisting here in the local community that we keep parks and open space a part of that equation. I just keep going back to that because, I was actually born in South Florida.
Okay.
I grew up here, but I was born in South Florida. And the natural default, if we aren't proactive, is that we will look like South Florida in 50 years, and I think that would be a mistake.
Okay, good stuff. So as a Charleston resident, I want to ask, moving off politics as we kind of wind this down, what do you like to do for fun in the Charleston area?
I love the water. The water's always been a big part of my life, and so I've always surfed and windsurfed, and now I attempt to kiteboard. I'm still scared of that sail.
I don't blame you.
It has such power. Wow. Yeah. With my boys, thankfully 3 of my sons live here in Charleston. Two of them are real estate guys. Throw them a crumb occasionally.
Yeah, we'll have to talk.
A crumb.
Yeah.
And
Least I can do.
Yeah, and so you get to do that stuff with them. We have a farm about an hour south of here, which is sort of a sacred place for me. It's always been a place where I could get away from it all, and I love that place. And so we do all the traditional hunting and fiddling outdoors and just running a bush hog and just being outside and clearing your mind kind of thing down there. So I love the country-city combination, but particularly the water. We have a little boat and we go around in the summer, and I really love that part of low country life.
Okay, well, to the first point about surfing, stay tuned. I think we just booked a show for the end of February that's all about the surfing industry and everything that's going on here. And part of the show is they're going to bring me out surfing. So
nice.
I've not surfed yet, but
in February, no less. Good luck.
Yeah,
the water will be a little nippy.
Yeah, they've got a
wetsuit.
They've got a surf company. Yeah, they got the wetsuit for me. They got some boots. They said. So we'll give it a shot. I don't know if we're going to film that one or not. Maybe we'll
Folly
film it.
Beach, here we come.
Highly edit it. So last question before we start to wrap up here.
Yeah.
It's a question I ask of everybody. What is your vision of Charleston? If you were to wake up 10 years from now, what do you want Charleston to look like?
I want it to have that park, and this is something I'd ask everybody to help out on. This is another project that I will get into once I lock into something that puts a little bit of bread on the table. Again, I think it's vital that we lock and set aside that park. It's something that I actually began to work on as governor, and then I got derailed, and then I came back to it in the stint in Congress, but then ran out of time. But we have an incredible opportunity. I mean, you think about the epicenter as Charleston goes and grows here over the next 100 years will really be about Daniel Island. And the ability for a young millennial to get on a water taxi from downtown Charleston and run over and in less than 10 minutes be at a roughly 400-acre spot where you could take your bike and you could ride around, not contesting traffic as you do so, would be a big deal. The idea of you think about all the great cities of the world, they have parks of scale. Think about London. Think about Paris. Think about even Tokyo. Think about the waterfront harbor park there in Sydney, Australia. I mean, around the world. I mean, think about San Francisco. Think about Central Park. I used to live in New York. I could not have survived in that city were it not for Central Park. 640 acres there in the middle of Manhattan. And so we have that opportunity with Spoils area on the tip of Daniel Island. And what I've suggested is don't take the whole thing. It's almost 1,000 acres, and you can go ahead and the Ports Authority can develop in time the left-hand side. But preserve the right-hand side. It gets the prevailing breeze. A family could take a picnic basket after church on Sunday and have the kids wandering and get that prevailing summer breeze, which makes all the difference in the world. What we don't want to do is save just parks out at the periphery of Charleston, because cities as they grow get harder and harder to get out of. But to be in the center and to have a park of scale, I think would be an incredible lifestyle enhancement and something that we could all enjoy. And so I'm going to work on that, but I'd ask other people to work on that as well.
Okay. That's a great answer.
Yeah.
That's great. So at this point, we start to wind down the show, and at this point, I offer my Building Charleston pro tip. All right, and this week's pro tip is take your shot. All right, because you miss every shot that you don't take, and I say that in the context of my meeting you and having the opportunity to
Sure.
get you on the show. The whole way that this show came about, we were at a similar coffee shop. I saw Mark sitting by himself waiting for someone to show up. I was actually with a friend of mine, and I said, "Boy, I should go over there and ask him, to be on the show." He said, "Oh boy, I don't know. Go for it." So sure enough, walked across the room, and just Mark was very friendly, and gave him my card, and he said, "Yeah, I'd love to be on the show." And I was kind of stunned, but I was like, "Wow, that's awesome." So I took my shot and I got it, and it's very similar to other people who are going to be on the show coming up. I referenced the surf experience. It's a guy who actually listens to the podcast a lot. He's like, "I got a surfing show, or I got a surfing company. They can make for a great show. You want to do a show on it?" I said, heck yeah, I want to do that.
Right.
So he took his shot and he got it. You miss every shot you don't take. So that's the Building Charleston pro tip. Take your shot, because even if you miss, who cares? Because but you will miss every shot that you don't take. with that said, we do host guests every single week or every other week at this point on the show. So if you've got a story that you think is interesting, please reach out to me. Like I said, we record every other week or so, and we're available on iTunes, Spotify, all the iPad podcast platforms, along with Instagram and YouTube. Finally, I would say this, getting back to taking your shot. If you're listening to this podcast from outside the country or outside the state of South Carolina or the Charleston area, and you want to open up a business here, take a shot and give me a call. My phone number and my contact information are in the show notes to the podcast. Reach out to me. I can show you, at least from a real estate perspective, where the opportunities are for you to set up shop. So with that said, I just want to thank Mark Sanford one more time for being on the podcast today. I want to thank the listeners for tuning in and everyone who helps make this show a possibility. Go out there, everyone, and make it a great day.